Hello friends, welcome to Dr. Ossai Physiology Academy, DOPA for short. This is the place where we make the learning of physiology easy, exciting, and effective. Thank you for joining me. And if you're new to this channel, you're especially welcome. And if you love the content that we share, kindly click the like button and also the subscribe button. And don't forget to turn on notifications so that you don't get to miss any new content that we drop. All right, now let's get started. So today we're going to be dealing with regulation of feeding, or you can call it regulation of food intake. And you ask yourself, but all this while we've been talking about regulation of gastric motility, intestinal motility, gastric secretion, and so on. We'll be talking about regulation in GIT. So what is this about? What's so special about this? Now the difference is that all the regulations we've been talking about has to do with how the body handles food that has already entered into the GIT. You have taken food quite all right. So how the body deals with two basic mechanisms, which we say motility, movement of the food, and secretion, that releases a lot of water, electrolytes, and enzymes, mucus, and all of that, that will help to handle the food. Okay, the body regulates that by enteric plexus with some support from the ANS, the autonomic nervous system. But this one is now dealing with how much food you take in the first place, when you should eat, and how much you should even eat. That's what this regulation is talking about. Regulation of food intake. Okay? So it has to do with when you should eat. And number two, how much you should eat. So it needs to know when you should eat and how much you should eat. Why? Why? Now, for you to recognize how the body operates, you must always think about the goal. You should ask yourself, what is the goal of this regulation? Why is it telling you when to eat? Why is it telling you how much you should eat? Now, the goal of regulation of food intake, the goal is simply what we call energy balance. Just think of it this way, similar to temperature regulation. Okay, the body has a certain temperature that this is normal to help in the biochemical processes and all of that happen, reactions. So there is heat gain processes, heat loss processes. So it tends to balance. When you are gaining so much heat, then it starts helping you lose heat through the heat loss process. The same thing happens. Energy balance has to do with the fact that you need energy to power the biochemical processes, which lead to the physiological process that we see. Okay? The metabolic process, all the chemical reactions, transport processes, and all of that happen in your body. They need energy to work. Okay? So there is a certain amount of energy they need. And that energy comes from the food that you eat. Okay? So they gain that energy through food. And also as they walk, they lose the energy. And they will need to gain more energy to replenish what has been lost. So there needs to be a balance between energy loss and energy gain. Why do you think there needs to be a balance? Now, if there's too much energy loss, of course, you know what will happen. you don't have enough energy to power your physiological, biochemical processes. You start becoming weak and a lot of so many other things. Though in nutrition, they deal with deficiency, nutrient deficiency, and all the several things it can cause. Okay, that's that. So the body does not want too much loss. Then if there's too much gain, what do you think will happen? That means you are gaining more than you are losing. You are taking in more energy than you are expending energy. What does it do? It now starts storing the excess energy in the form of adipose tissue, which is usually in the subcutaneous layer of the skin. Okay? Subcutaneous. It means underneath the skin. Subcutaneous. Alright? So that's what happens. So when you gain too much energy, it starts being stored as fat. So when you see people who are big, have a lot of fat, adipose tissue, it's trying to tell you that they are taking in more energy than they are expending. And if you look at a lot of weight loss program, people that want to lose weight, there are two things that go on there. They now do what will make them lose more energy, and they now reduce what will make them gain energy. So they diet to reduce intake of energy, and they exercise to increase expending energy. So it now, when energy loss is now more than energy gain, what happens? The body now begins to go to this store. So adipose tissue is actually a store of energy. Those fat you see, it's a store of energy. So when energy loss is more than gain, it now begins to take from this store to use to produce energy. And you begin to lose adipose tissue, begin to slim down. That's what happens. Okay? So the body wants to maintain balance. It doesn't want you to have too much of fat. Of course, it can affect you when you have too much of fat. Okay? But it's a very complex process, but we'll just try to make it simple because there are so many things that influence how much you eat. Even cultural factors, environmental factors, and probably genetics. So it's not a very straightforward, straight line on a theory. Okay? But we can understand it from the basic, from what the body is trying to do. Sometimes you can give someone a particular meal, and because that person loves that particular meal, maybe a soup, the person will eat so much of that food at a time. The same soup you give to another person, that person doesn't like it, to eat small. So what is determining is not really because the person is hungry or not, but just cultural, personal preference. So a lot of psychological can influence how much you eat. Okay? But we don't want to go into other complexities. We just want to follow the normal, natural, physiological principle behind feeding. And it has to do with when you should eat. That means the body needs to have ways to detect when nutrients in your body is being depleted. And there are different mechanisms. We'll mention them. It needs to have also mechanism to detect that, yes, nutrients are now much. You can now stop feeding. Okay? So in that sense, you have long-term regulation, you have short-term regulation. Okay? So short-term regulation is just telling you how much you should eat now, within the next few minutes or hours, how much food you should take. The long-term is telling you how much food you should take over a long period of time, in weeks and months. We're going to talk about that after this break. Right? Welcome back. So now we've talked about that you can have long-term and short-term. Now, everything about regulation, you must refer to a control center. There's a center that determines, that controls everything, how much you should take, and so on. Okay? So that center is in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is where feeding is controlled. And because you have what should determine you taking food and what should determine you stopping to take food, there are two centers that relate to feeding in the hypothalamus. You have the lateral nucleus or nuclei of the hypothalamus. This one is, we call it the feeding center. Feeding center. Okay, what it does is that it makes you take food. Okay, so it detects that you are hungry and makes you want to take food. In other words, it increases your appetite. It's a food-seeking center, feeding center. Hunger. It responds to hunger, tells you that you are hungry. Okay? Then there's a part of the hypothalamus called ventromedial nuclei. What does this one do? It tells you that you are satisfied, you've eaten enough, or yeah, stop eating. So it's called the satiety center. Satiety center. Okay? So this is what the hypothalamus does. So when you need to take in food, this part is stimulated. When you need to stop taking in food, this part is stimulated. So now we are going to look at the mechanism. How does this stimulation occur? Okay? So let's look at it. About 5 different things that influence this hypothalamus, the feeding, these two centers. Now, one of them is neural stimulation. That's nervous stimulation. Okay? Due to stretching of the GIT. Okay? Neural stimulation from distension of GIT. So what does this one mean? Now, it's trying to say, especially the stomach. When food enters your stomach, what does it do? It stretches the stomach. So it's a kind of mechanism that measures the volume of the stomach. It's trying to say, the volume of food you've taken is enough for you should stop. Okay? So it's due to the distension. The more food you take, the more your stomach is distended. That's why sometimes when you eat your stomach, you say, my stomach is tight, I can't put in. So it sends information to this and stimulates this satiety center to make you not want to take again. Say, you've taken enough quantity. So through that stretch, neural, it does that. Okay? Another one is through chemical. That's the nutrients that come from food. Chemical stimulation from nutrients. Okay? So immediately your food is digested and absorbed. Those nutrients, they enter your bloodstream. And of course, the hypothalamus detects that you have enough. That means enough glucose, enough amino acids. So it's a kind of chemoreceptors that determine you have enough glucose in your bloodstream now, enough amino acid just after feeding, and to detect and say you have enough abundance of resources. You can stop eating. Okay? Chemical stimulation from nutrients. Then you have another one, number 3. Now, hormones from the GIT itself can detect the amount of food. Okay? We talk of neural chemical from the nutrient. Now, this one is now from hormones. Hormones from the GIT that will go to the hypothalamus and tell it that you need to stop to stimulate this ventromedial nucleus and say you need to stop feeding or you need to take in food. Both either ways. Okay? So, another one, number 4, hormones from what? Adipose tissue. It's a very interesting discovery. Now, this fat you see, adipose tissue, sometimes functions like an endocrine gland. It releases hormone. We'll talk about it. Hormones from adipose tissue. Then finally, the 5th thing there that you need to, how it is stimulated. It's now stimulation from the cerebral cortex, the higher center. Okay? Stimulation from cerebral cortex. Okay, we're going to talk about each of them briefly, shortly. Now, neural stimulation, I've talked about that. When you eat, distension of the stomach, especially the stomach and the duodenum, those 2 places. When they stretch, it sends signal, say stop. This one, chemical stimulation from nutrients. After they have been absorbed, just immediately after feeding. There's abundance of nutrients. Okay, the body has enough of what it needs to power the different processes. You don't need to take in more to signal it for you to stop. Then this one, hormone from the GIT. There's a particular hormone. It's called ghrelin. Ghrelin. This ghrelin is a newly discovered hormone. Okay? It's a newly discovered hormone. And what does it do? It's, first of all, it's released from the oxytic cell or parietal cells of the stomach. So this ghrelin is a hormone that is released when you need to take in food in times of hunger. Okay? So it's released and it stimulates this aspect. This one tells you to take in food. All right? So when it's stimulated, you seek food to take. When you're hungry, empty stomach and all of that, it is released. Then immediately you take in food, there's distension of stomach, food is very, it's released, stops. And it's part of what tells you that, because it's no longer stimulating, its release stops. Okay? So it tells the body that you should stop being stimulated. You should stop taking in food. So that's what it does. And it does that in short term. You can see that is once you take in food, it stops being released. So it's short term, between minutes, hours. Then this one, hormones from adipose tissue. That hormone is called leptin. Leptin, the adipose tissue, those, they call it adipocytes. As fat cells, they release a hormone called leptin. And that leptin acts opposite to ghrelin. It's a hormone that goes to this satiety center to stimulate it. It suppresses this one and stimulates this one to make you eat less. Because it's telling you that you have enough store of energy. Why taking more? You see it? So, but it's long term. Adipose tissue is already present. It's continuously released. So, continuously reduces your intake of food so that you don't get too fat. But again, It is not so straightforward. Sometimes you find people who are fat who still eat so much. So it's not so straightforward, but basically that's what it does, leptin. Then stimulation from the cerebral cortex. How does this one happen? It happens through sight, smell, your thoughts of food. You see food. You might not really be hungry, might not desire food, but there's a certain delicacy you just see with your eyes and you smell with your nose. Immediately your appetite is stimulated. It stimulates this feeding center. Okay? The same thing, there's some certain smell of food. Sometimes you feel like vomiting. I'm sure you've experienced it. So it suppresses your feeding. So this is how it comes from this cerebral cortex. Through smell of food, taste of food, and thought of food can influence how much food you eat at a particular time. So these are the different ways in which the body controls and regulates how much food you take. It's very straightforward, very easy regulation of feeding. Right, so I've written a book on gastrointestinal physiology. All these things, they are there. So for further reading, to get further details, you can look for the book. Check the description box. You see the links to download the soft copy just for a token. Okay, and all other books in physiology, about 7 of them as at the time of this recording, I've written. In case you need them, the links are also there. All right, so you can also check our website. The link to our website is also there, so that you can get to know many other things we do to make the learning of physiology easy, exciting, and effective. See you in the next video.